Rambam for Thursday, Chav Zayin Tishrei Tafshin Payalef, the 8th Perek of Hilchos Brachos. So in this Perek, we're returning to the subject of Birchas Hanenin. After we began discussing this a bit in Perek Gimel, there we were discussing the Chameshes Mini Dagan, the grains. Now we're going to talk about fruits and vegetables and stuff like that, and other things like that. In other words, Ha'etz, Ha'adama, Shehako, and the appropriate Bracha Achrona, as we shall see. Halacha Aleph. Kol Perek Sa'ilan, all fruits of the tree. Mavarchan Aleim B'tchila B'rei Pri Ha'etz, of a safe burn of Fashas Rabbis. You make Ha'etz in the beginning and a burn of Fashas at the end. Chotz Mechameshes Haminin Aksuvim B'Torah, except for the 5 minim that are in the Torah. So, first of all, Perek Sa'ilan, we're going to discuss the exact definition of what that means in a moment. Mavarchan Aleim, we already introduced some of the brachos, like I said, in Perek Gimel, so you might be familiar from there. Chameshes Haminin, now of course there are Shivas Haminin, but 2 of them are grains, Chitim and Sa'irim. So that leaves us with 5 Chameshes Haminin in the Torah. So that's grapes, pomegranates, figs, olives, and dates. So in that case, instead of making a burn of fashas at the end, you make a me'in shalish. It's like an alamichya. It's a condensed bracha out of the whole benching, the 3 brachas in benching. That's why it's me'in shalish. It's kind of like the 3 brachas of benching. Cause what? In this case, is that I didn't have a chance to see what the exact reason for that is. Are they more satiating than others? I didn't have a chance to see that specific explanation. But they're chashav, at least for whatever purpose, they're chashav, so they get a bracha that's more in line with benching. So that's the Perek Sa'ilan and the Chameshes Haminin. Now, the Chol Perek Aretz Vayirakas, note the language of the Rambam, fruits of the earth and vegetables. I'm going to get into that in a moment. The beginning and the burn of fashas at the end. And things that don't grow from the ground at all. Like meat, cheese, fish, eggs, water, milk, honey. So all of those, with the exception of water, come from animals. Water is just a naturally occurring substance. It doesn't grow. But Shehako, burn the fashas Rabbis, or Shehako in the beginning, burn the fashas at the end. If you're drinking not because you're thirsty, but for another reason, then there's no bracha before or after. Now, first, I want to talk a little bit about the fruits and the vegetables. So first, let's mention the definition of a fruit and vegetable according to science today. How would you define a fruit and a vegetable? So now, the way people commonly refer to fruits and vegetables is not scientific. Most people would say that a fruit is something that grows on a tree, plus it has like a sugary, sweet, has a high sugar content, it's sweet, versus something that grows closer to the ground. Now, the actual scientific definition is basically something like this. The people will tell you, a tomato is really a fruit, a pepper, a cucumber, they're really fruits. How does that figure? So the definition of a vegetable is a herbaceous plant. It's a plant it's not woody. It has more of what we recognize as a vegetable. Also, generally, it should only grow for 1 season. So that's how you would define a vegetable. So that covers broccoli and carrots and kale and stuff like that. But then you have these things in the middle. The definition of a fruit, according to science, is something that is the body of a seed plant, meaning the plant grows, there's the actual plant, and then there's something the plant produces in order to distribute its seeds. That's not the same thing. That's an extra product. So like a chicken lays an egg, so a plant produces a seed distribution. A fruit. That's how we define a fruit if you go with how science explains it today. So tomatoes have seeds in them, peppers have seeds in them, cucumbers have seeds in them. These are all seed distribute. If you think about it, so that's by that definition, it would be considered a fruit.
Don't we have the definition of perennial, which means that the tree goes to sleep during the winter and automatically brings out what it has to do.
So that's going to be an element of what we're going to talk about according to halacha. But according to this definition, anything that has seeds in it and isn't the plant itself, it's something that grows on the plant, that's a fruit. And then you have the plant itself. In that case, the plant itself, which doesn't have seeds, it's just an edible plant, that would be a vegetable. So that's that's what you have sometimes. Then you'll say tomatoes are fruit, or even tomato sauce is a fruit, and sometimes legally you get some interesting funny results. For nutritional value, they try to argue that eating pizza is a fruit because it has tomato sauce and tomato. Okay, but that's how. But we're not using that definition. And note that Rambam himself said Peres haaretz v'yiraka, so he acknowledged that there are some things that grow from the ground that are Peres, but they're Peres haaretz, and then there are Yirakas. So for us, what's most important is the tree, because we say Bari Pri Ha'etz, and then we distinguish the ones that aren't Pri Ha'etz. So it's very important to define what a tree is. That's a lot more important for us than it would be for anyone else. So you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Gimel, so it says Peres haaretz is Hadam. The Siman Leida Eza Pri Ha'etz, Eza Pri Hadam. What's the Siman? So the way the Alter Rebbe defines it there is, if you would take away the fruit and the branch is still there for the next year and it produces another fruit, that's a perennial in a sense, and there's actually an unaf, there's actually a branch that's still there. You can point to it during the winter or whatever and say, hey, that's the tree that doesn't have fruits right now, but it's going to have fruit soon. So that's Pri Ha'etz. But if the whole eitz disappears even if it grows back out of the roots, so it is perennial to some extent, but there isn't an actual plant, an actual tree, then, according to the Alter Rebbe, you would make a Bari Pri Hadama, and therefore he says berries that grow in some kind of bush, you make a Bari Pri Hadama, and then he gets into which kind of berries, if they're edible, they're not edible, but that's how the Alter Rebbe defines it over there. Of course, there are more details, it's more branched to make a bad pun. This is a more complicated topic, different Mishnah, different Achreinim, slightly different definitions can have different outcomes. There are just specific fruits I want to mention that are known to be a discussion. So, for example, banana is a discussion. What's the kind of plant is that?
Because that stays for the whole thing. You're very tall.
Well, you have to know exactly the definition. It might not.
The whole plant dies. They have to replant it again from scratch.
No, the banana tree stays.
There's no such thing as a banana tree.
Okay, so that's
why it's Hadama.
That's what we're not going to get into the details of.
You don't make rights. You don't make rights on a banana.
You're right.
We're not going to get into the details of it, but banana, depends which rishon you go according to. It might be eitz or Hadama. We're going to go with Hadama. The papaya is also a discussion. We're going to go with Hadama. A few hundred years ago, there was actually a controversy relating to chatzilim, to eggplant. Because moreover, the additional problem is that if you say that it is a tree, if you say that it is an eitz, the problem with the eggplant is that it doesn't last more than 3 years. Which means that if it's eitz, then there's always arla, and it never leaves the category of arla. It's perpetually arla. You'd never be allowed to eat it. The Chida, it's already the Radbaz, the Kaftar Farach, different. The Swarm talk about it. The Chida says the Beis Yosef and the Arizal. We know for a fact that they ate chatzilim, so we know that it's got to be okay. So now we have to justify, and he comes up with a justification of how to define the plant to make sure that the plant's okay. Interestingly, in very, very recent years, there's been a similar controversy regarding pineapple. I was in a Chassidish Beis Medrash in Lakewood, and I saw the Rav there. His name is Rabbi Halberstam. He's from Babava dynasty. He made a big kuntras. It was sitting in the shul. I don't know if he distributed it, but it was in the shul. He had a big kuntras on pineapple because there was a Litvish Rav that came out and had the same taina on pineapple mitzad arla that also doesn't last more than 3 years. Seems to be a fruit, and it's always going to be arla in that case. And this Rav Halberstam, he went out to Arichas, his matur things, Arichas, all the Shainim and Achreinim, that means the whole Chatzilim discussion, quotes the Paiskim, quotes the Alter Rebbe, according to Alter Rebbe's the definition, it should be okay. So according to all that, if it's not an eitz, it's not ha'etz, so then the problem goes away. He even flew down to Hawaii, and he visited the plantations, and he spoke to the experts, and he read the books, and it's full of pictures and of the plants, of the books. Papaya, most people know, I don't know if everyone even knows that it's a problem, but generally people eat pineapple and we eat eggplants. Right?
As Hadama.
As Hadama. Of course, there are many other halachas in every line. I'm just going to try, let's say, Shoyis Mayim L'tzmoi is a discussion I'm not going to be able to get, especially that we're running a bit later today. Halacha Beis. Aseichet Peiris. So this is about May Peiris. We spoke about Peiris, now we're talking about May Peiris. Juice. And which is also going to bring us to Bari Pri Hagafen. You squeeze a fruit and you get the juice. You make a shahakal, not eitz anymore. Shahakal and burn nefashos. Except for grapes and olives, they're the exception. For wine, you make a Bari Pri Hagafen at the beginning, and you make a main shalosh at the end. And the oil is the exception that you still make the Bari Pri Hagafen on it like a fruit itself. This is only a specific kind of oil consumption. If your throat is bothering you, you drink it along with boiled water that boiled other fruits, and it's some kind of concoction that gives you pleasure. You're helping your throat. You're giving yourself relief. If you're just drinking, just downing oil, or you had that whole concoction, but your throat wasn't hurting, so you didn't really need to take it. Then you make the regular shakal. You didn't actually enjoy the oil. Now, there's also a lot to comment here. I'm just going to look for the interesting points. For example, for agafen, there's a whole discussion regarding grape juice. Is grape juice the same thing as wine? Especially if it's reconstituted, you had concentrate and you added water, so now it's this watery, if it has water naturally in it, that's one thing, but you poured the water into it, so now is this a watery, grape flavored water, especially regarding Kiddush, which might have its own gather, but even regarding the Brachos Perek, it's a discussion. You also have a whole discussion relating to, this farm talk about how they used to make wine out of raisins in Europe, and have grapes commonly, but raisins are a bit more common, so...
mead.
Which, no, you want to make Perek Agafen. You don't make Agafen on mead, do you?
No, mead.
Mead, I understand. Med.
Med.
That's not, you don't make Agafen on mead, do you?
Okay, you're allowed to use it for Kiddush.
Okay, so the place can discuss these slight variations and how they did it. I'm going to quote something from the Tzemach Tzedek in a second. So looking now to Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Shabbos, he talks about Yein Tzimukim. You take the dry grapes and you put water and you soak it for 3 days and it turns into wine. So it says it has to be that if you would squeeze the grape, the raisin itself, something would come out. You're able to get an extract from it. So you could say that moisture is what's making the wine. But even if you stepped on it and squeezed it and you pressed it, nothing would come out. Only the soaking gives it a flavor. Then he says you can't make kiddush on it. You can't make. So you see both. Also, what's the ratio of water in raisin? Tzemach Tzedek has an interesting discussion. He says that there's a rumor, say in the name of my grandfather, that there has to be, you have to put in 3 liters of tzimukim to get 1 shtaf, which is another measurement of wine. And if you're not getting that much wine out of it, then it's not wine. Is that rumor true? Is it not? He says the Achreinim doesn't. It seems like a big chumrah compared to what the Achreinim says. Ilo yisi shemei. If I would have heard it myself, vada yisi machmer. But I didn't hear befeidush. But you can't prove otherwise either. The fact that I didn't hear it. So interesting discussion. Also, the Tzemach Tzedek. There's a few tshuvas on this topic. He talks about Dina Seinu, that you actually mix the honey, and that sounds more like mead. Other ingredients, and then what's the ratio, and does it have the flavor with the grapes, with the raisins itself, or is the other stuff giving it the whole flavor? He says Maskana de Milsa, that there have to be enough tzimukim that even without the dvash would have tam umar yayin. So lots of discussions on the technicalities. Bar 11 has a perek on this in Shir Elach L'Mais and Kiddush Avdallah Ayin Shem Allah Gimel. Peiros are Yeraka Shedarkim Le'achal Chayim. So fruits and vegetables that you eat them raw, that's normal, that's the norm. And Bishla and Shlakam, what if you didn't eat them raw? You cook them, whatever it is, you cook them in water. Then it's a shakal. And vice versa. If you only eat them after preparing them, after cooking them, going krov, velefes, cabbage, turnips, and machal and chayim. So if you ate them without cooking them, then you make a shakal because you didn't prepare it right. The vegetable has to be eaten according to its normal mode of preparation. And then you make a hadama. I'm going to give a few examples and get into details in a second. And if you eat them either cooked or uncooked, so then either way, then you make the appropriate bracha. He started halacha with peiros and yerakas. The middle, he just mentioned yerakas because there are no fruits that you only have to cook first in order to eat. So he didn't mention peiros; he only mentioned yerakas, the cabbage and the turnip. Then back at the end of the halacha, he gets back to peiros and yerakas, depending on whatever the bracha is. Make the bracha. Mayu peiros eitz, mayu peiros adama yerakas. Now, I remember having an argument many years ago with someone regarding carrots nowadays. Because you look at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Hey, so Alter Rebbe says, "Are your ruckus that you eat? You don't eat it chayin, you don't eat it raw, even with bread. It has to be cooked or salted or whatever." And he gives the examples Alter Rebbe gives there are kruv, dlas, and tradin, and that's cabbage, squash. And interestingly, I saw in the new translation of Alter Rebbe they translated tradin as spinach, which I think is a mistake because if you look at modern Hebrew, they decided that tared is going to be the word for spinach. They needed a word for tared. For spinach, they called it tared. But if you look in the history in Svarim, tared is always selek. They're interchangeable, and it's beets. The Alter Rebbe himself in Luch Berachos Hanan writes that trodden is burkus, a burek is a beet. I don't know
Just
why.
I know that's it.
Modern Hebrew, they made a distinction. Just they made the convention became that tared, the spinach,
they
and
did the same thing with cucumber and green squash. Same.
Glass, malafafon. Okay, so you have to be careful with the translation. But Alter Rebbe clearly meant beets, not spinach here. So those are three things Alter Rebbe says you don't eat plain, so you make a shahako. And then he gives another example, like lefes. Lefes is ribbon and merin. So lefes, ribbon, that's turnip, and the merin is carrots. He says we eat them mevushal, so you make a pretty demo when they're mevushal, and otherwise not. However, nowadays, the reality is that plain carrot is a snack.
Beets is also a snack.
Right, like look at
we raw beets now as well.
right, other vegetables as well.
The steamed or boiled. You cannot eat a raw beet.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, well, it depends what. Maybe cabbage, raw cabbage, maybe. Yeah,
raw cabbage is coleslaw, no?
Well, okay, there's other ingredients in it. But anyway, carrots, we literally just eat plain, straight, regular carrot from the bag. If you look at Alter Rebbe Seder Berachos Hanan, which is where it's the last time he goes through these halachas in Perek Vav, so there the language is Derech Reiv Bnei Adam. That's the wording that Alter Rebbe uses, Derech Reiv Bnei Adam. If you look in the Haaretz and Seder Berachos Hanan printed by Rav Alashvili, so they write in the footnote, L'chayra, today, the Reiv Bnei Adam, if the definition is Reiv Bnei Adam, look at Reiv Bnei Adam. Reiv Bnei Adam now eat carrots when they're chai as well, so it should be Adama. And I'm trying to Igris Chelik Zayin. Look at Igris Chelik Zayin is a minor from the Rebbe. It's actually just a Ksav HaKodesh that the Rebbe added in a letter in Tafshin Yud Gimel Tergitz Abdubov. The Inyan Merin Chayan regarding plain carrots. Look at Berachos Hanan She'ein Gimel Roiv. The Rebbe underlined the word Roiv, and the Rebbe's been signed to Mishnah Brura for more Mar Mekaymis. It's not clear to me what the Rebbe was trying to say here, if the Rebbe was trying to say that Raves do this or Raves do that. But I remember last time I had this conversation that if you look up the history of carrots as a snack, it's actually a very recent development. In the 1980s and 1990s, some guy invented baby carrots. What are baby carrots? Just deformed carrots that he just snipped into tiny pieces, into little carrot-shaped pieces, and they marketed them, and it caught on. Marketing has the power to do that, and it became a snack. So now people eat baby carrots, people eat big carrots. Most people would tell you that Reiv Bnei Adam, the Mitzias changed. The same thing goes for other vegetables. Look at the Mishnah Brura. So no concept here of salad that's mentioned in Rambam or Shulchan Aruch. Look at Mishnah Brura. He may start mentioning salads. Salatin, me'orav, and shaman b'chaimetz, b'yed pri hadama, af b'chayin. Even if it just has oil and vinegar, you didn't actually process the vegetable. Let's say lettuce or cabbage or stuff like that. But chayin, even a bay pri hadama.
There's one vegetable that Alter Rebbe holds by an onion. That although you can make a hadama on it when it's raw, when it's cooked, it's shahako.
Interesting. Yeah. So there are a lot of interesting halachas relating to this. That's just a bit of that. Moving on to halacha daled. So now we spoke about mei peris, like sort of squeezing fruit. So now we're talking about the liquid that comes out of boiling a vegetable. You boil the vegetable. You actually make a bari pri adama. So it's not like fruit juice. But that was your intent. You did that for that intention. It's considered a form of eating the vegetable. It's one of the forms of eating the vegetable is boiling it and drinking the water. So it's like you're eating the vegetable, you make hadam. Dvash tamarim, the honey that's derived from dates, which apparently also involves some kind of cooking process. So it's similar in that sense. He's going to mention also in the next halacha. But here it's like a regular made peiros, you make a shahako. But if you didn't actually process the dates, you just squeeze them and turn them into some kind of mush, then it retains the halach of a regular date. You didn't actually do anything to it. It's still a date. It's just a squeeze date, a mush date, but it's still a date. You make the same brachos. Halacha hey.
When Rashi, when it comes to fig dates, though, he describes it as you pack them, and you leave them alone for a certain amount of time, then the honey will start to drip. So over there would be the honey would be what? It says Eres Zavas Chalu Dvash. So Rashi says Daf over there. Dvash means not bee honey, but fig honey.
It doesn't mention that over here, but presumably all, and unless said otherwise, sounds like everything that comes out of the peri is shahakol. That's what it sounds like.
The last thing basically is like these bars. They make them out of these bars. They smash up the fruit.
Right.
Yeah,
But maybe that's partially. I think you mentioned granola bars once before, but that's part of the problem. If you have the fruits that are, or the grains, or the different stuff like that. Okay. Now we're going to move on to sugar. Now the Rambam has a very interesting way of describing sugar because he doesn't have a word for sugar apparently in Hebrew. So this is how the Rambam describes it, and it's also a very unique shita of the Rambam. The sweet stalks that you squeeze and boil their liquid until it freezes, it congeals and turns into salt. Looks like salt.
He's talking about sugar
cane, but he doesn't have a word for it. So he just describes the grass and it looks like salt. So what's the bracha on sugar? So he sets this up. All the Goyim said hadama. Some even argue that it's a fruit. And they said if you without processing, if you just suck the stalks directly, you make hadama. Rambam says I'm starting up with everyone here. It's not a pri. It's just a shahakal. This honey that was processed with fire shouldn't be any better than the honey that came from dates. Where it wasn't processed, and you still make a shahakal, so why should this be any better? The Kesef Mishnah says that he thinks it sounds like he's arguing on both points. First of all, it's not a peri b'chlal. So therefore, even if you were sucking directly, it would be a shahakal. It's not a peri or a vegetable. And even if we would have said it's a peri, the Rambam is adding that it shouldn't be any different than any other processed thing. Then the Kesef Mishnah quotes the Torah. The Torah says that maybe we can argue that we shouldn't compare it to tamarim because there you can eat the date itself is a fruit. The honey is a byproduct. Here with the sugarcane, the whole product is the sugar itself. So we've had this concept that when you need, in order to actually enjoy the fruit or vegetable, you need to process it first. So that's the true form of that fruit or vegetable. So maybe it's different. And the Kesef Mishnah responds, if this would have been available for sale in the Torah's land, because where we live, they sell thousands and tens of thousands to suck the cane itself. So why are you saying that the sugar is the true form of people eat the cane itself? It's like any other meipetis. Look at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Alter Rebbe also brings this. There, Alter Rebbe mentions in parentheses it's called sukkar. So he says Yeshayim that's shahakol. That's the Rambam. Yeshayim that it's not. Mentions the other opinion. Safek brachos lahakol b'diavad. You can make either bracha b'diavad lahakol. But l'chatchila you should make a shahakol. And loch berachas hanan. Also he says you make a very pretty eight. So you write the same concept. And say the berachas hanan, which is the final. It just says Mavarch and all of Shahakal. It doesn't mention anything else. And they're Mitzayin over there. It's different to the Rambam, to this, to that. Time to Tzemach Tzedek and Piskei Dinim says that the Poskim agree that B'diavad your Yaitza. Then in the Haaretz and Seder Brachos Hanan, they say that today most sugar is beet sugar. So then it's for sure shahako. I looked into it though in America. It seems like cane sugar and beet sugar are pretty equally big industries in America. Maybe in Israel the beet sugar is more common than cane sugar. But anyway, I don't know anyone who eats sugar straight from the pack or even has cane, sucks on. So I don't see, I don't.
Only here in Crown Heights they sell the cane.
Well, I personally haven't.
It's a Caribbean thing.
Okay, great. So. I don't know if
they make a lot of corn.
Right. So the discussion might be moot though if no one's really consuming sugar straight like that anyway. Corn
syrup.
Okay, we have to. We're running late here. It's lavan, the top stalk of the palm tree, what we call today hearts of palm. Because Alter Rebbe explains in Simon Reish Beis that's not the main product of the palm tree altogether. The main product of the palm tree are the dates. This is a whole different part of the plant, so that's why it's just simply shahaka. Kafras shel tzalaf, so that's the tzalaf is the capered bush, and the kafras is not the fruit part of the caper bush. Some other, it's the leaves, the petals, the something.
Kafrisen is the actual caper.
We're going to mention in a second. We're going to do, so we're differentiating between the kafras and the aviyonis. So the kafras, it's not the fruit itself. It's part of the plant. The aviyonis shall tell off, but the aviyonis heina pri. The caper berries, they look like small dates. That's an actual fruit. All right. The
capers you get in a jar these days. You can buy it in the supermarket readily. So what is it?
It's the berries, then it's eights. I'm assuming they're selling the berries.
What would you think it's Adama?
I don't know, but I'm saying, how do you differentiate between the two?
Says that.
Eat it with something else.
Yeah.
Well, that's always the way out. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
You eat a shahaf.
By the way, the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this in the Seder Brachos at all. In the beginning of Seder Brachos, he says, in this Perek, he says that there are a lot of halachas that we didn't quote because they're not enum gedalim b'din aseinu. In Shulchan Aruch, he talks about whatever Shulchan Aruch talks about. In Seder Brachos, he only sticks to fruits and vegetables that were common. And there are other discussions, there are other halachas when the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention something in Seder Brachos. Is it because he changed his mind compared to Shulchan Aruch, or is it simply not relevant? So he skipped it. All right, halacha zayin, pilpul v'azangvul. You have pepper and ginger. So now we're mostly familiar with them as actual spices, but they start off as a plant. So bismanchin, you're tubing when the plant itself is moist. Once it's dry, you don't make a bracha at all. Once it turns into a spice, you don't eat the spice. The spice is just spicing up something else. Anything that's not really edible or drinkable, then you don't make a bracha at all. Because the Mishnah says that we consider pilpul and eights for arla. So why don't we make a bar priya eights when it's moist? Why does it say to make a hadama? So yesh loymar that because you're not planning on eating it the way they are. You're really only using it for spices. So even when you do eat it as a plant, you should change the bracha a little bit. Alter Rebbe also talks about and say the Brachos that yesh oimnim pilpul should be priya eights because they're on the ilan. Yesh oimnim priya adama because your whole point is just for spices. But zangvul, ginger, it's not ikra pri, it's a root under the ground, so you for sure make adama. There's no discussion.
It's not horrible.
But over here, they touch on the min kinamo. That's a mistake. That's a
no. That's not eight. The Alter Rebbe said because I mentioned that separately. Eight shel kinomen she kain simmerend. That's something you actually do eat. You do have the what are they called? The cinnamon sticks. So that's dafka something. Well, he says Alter Rebbe says it is something they eat. So you would make a bar priya adama. Unlike the other spices, which are only eaten as a spice. All right, there's a lot.
Cinnamon is how you do it. That it's the bark of the cinnamon tree that you're eating. It's the actual bark of the cinnamon tree.
Okay. He says eight shel kinomen. He said eight shel kinomen. So it would be hadama. It grows from the earth like stalks. So you'd make a hadama. Halacha ches. Now we have other shahakos that we didn't mention earlier. Earlier we mentioned like meat products and stuff like that, dairy. Here we mentioned additional things. Hapas she'ipsha, so spoiled bread, v'yayin shehikris, wine that it's a bit off. The food is spoiled. V'anoiv l'shem pagan, fruit that fell when it was still underdeveloped. V'ashecher, beer, achemetz, vinegar, v'agevai, locusts, v'hamalach, salt, v'kamein, pitrius, mushrooms and truffles. Al-kulin, v'varach, tchil shahakol miyeh b'dvarei. You make a shahakol on them all. Alter Rebbe gets into the details, different reasons, either because it's mushrooms, the cloud don't really grow from the ground, even though they seem to, but it's not really. Other things, they were in a scalpel, they got ruined a bit, so they lost their bracha, etc. Here they've been the whole full burn nefashos according to the Rambam. Whatever you make a shahakal for, you automatically make a burn nefashos. Whatever you make a bracha afterwards, you always make a bracha before. Those are just rules that he got, I think, from the Mishnah. So halacha tes shmarim. So this relates to what we discussed in halacha beis about grape juice. Shmarim, you have the dregs. Shenasan aleim shloisha v'hitzir ba. You pour 3 measures of water over the dregs, and by the time you're finished, you have 4 measures of liquids. That means the dregs contributed a quarter of the liquid. We can consider the outcome to be wine that has water. But if you don't get 3 parts water, 1 part wine, even if there is a wine flavor, it's already shaka. Mistakes. If you made a Beirei Pri Adama on a fruit, yatsa, because it all comes from the ground. But if you make a ha'etz on vegetables, on things from the ground, you weren't yatsa. Now, some Girsayas in the Rambam Yishen were missing the first word yatsa that says lo yatsa on both. Because the Mishnah discusses it, but the Mastana is that the Rambam wrote yatsa, just like the Mishnah says, you're yatsa with Beirei Pri Adama for eitz, but you're not yatsa with eitz for Adama. If you make shahakal on anything, you're yetz afil possible yayin, obviously b'diavad, not l'chatchila. This is an interesting sheet of the Rambam that we don't follow what you say, we follow what you think. You're holding beer. You had a mind to say shahakal, which is the correct bracha. We don't send you back. You had vegetables or hadama. You want to make the right bracha, but you said the wrong words. It's fine. And grain. When it was really yatsa. When you said Hashem's name, that's the main part. When you had the right bracha in mind. Because you never mistake in the main part. Even though you made a mistake at the end, the Ravid says that's not true, and the Kesef Mishnah says I have a whole arichas about Hilchos Kriyashma. We're not getting into it. Alter Rebbe we don't have the Siman and Alter Rebbe Siman Reish test. We have a few Simanim missing. Also, Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about it in the Luach and the Say, the Brachos and Enem, but in his Hilchos Sfiras Ha'emer, Alter Rebbe gets into it, but we don't have the time to get into the details. What if you have a misafik? You're not sure what you did. You don't go back. And whether it's the first or last bracha, it's midrabanan tzavik brachos. You don't go back and say it again. What if you put something in your mouth without a bracha? So you mashkim, according to the Rambam, if it was liquid, if you swallow it, you make a bracha afterwards. The Rabbi disagrees. Soon if it's true that if you take it out, it will be disgusting at this point. Tusim, ba'anavim, berries and grapes. So you push it to the side of your mouth and make a bracha, and you swallow them. And if they don't get disgusted, even if you take them out, you can pull them ba'afunim, beans or peas, so you expel them from your mouth. So Shulchan Aruch Siman Kufayim Beis Ayin Sham. So now we have stories that used to make up for hair. Someone knows that in Kedim and Brachos they would spread out a table. The Rambam makes it very simple though. The Rambam has a very simple system, so you don't have to get confused. If they all have the same bracha, so make a bracha on one of them, and you have the rest covered. If the brachas aren't equal, make the appropriate bracha, and whatever you want to have first, whatever you like, have that first. Out of order, the brachas doesn't matter. If you have no preference, then Shivas Aminim comes first. Whatever's earlier in the pasuk comes first. When we say honey, we don't mean honey, we actually mean the dates themselves. And dates come before grapes. Eretz twice, and in the second time, dvash is closer to Eretz than the second time. Then the anavim are shlishi la'eretz, anavim are third to the Eretz the first time. It's the same bracha as ala michya, but we just changed a few words. We only see tzunim asasada here, not by ala michya. We say tzunim asasada for all three. There's a letter from the Rabbi about whether you should change the other parts of the bracha to Eretz Yisrael or not. We do something similar. We add that extra line. It's like the fourth bracha I'm benching. The some say not to add that line, which we do. Tezvav. If you ate all three, you make one big bracha at the etc. About this, that you say al hagafen v'haperes instead of al haperes. To Zayin avlam ochel bas v'shasa yayin mevarach b'seif al zeh b'pnei atzma. You make each bracha achreina separately. Achol tein ma'irav matabuch magas v'yitzma. You made a bunch of fruits. Mevarach b'seif bracha achas mein shalish. Then you don't make a shahakal separately. You make one mein shalish v'klalas hakoil. It includes all the fruits. Meishakum peres eitzain. They're all fruits from a tree. V'chein kol kayitz.
I was referring to this one over here, the way